I am going to take you on a journey of people who live here in Northern Ireland, people who live in your communities and in your towns. And these stories are from people across Northern Ireland who have been let down by the justice agencies who are there to protect them. People think stalking is about creeping about in the dark or using keyboards to do online surveillancing. I would like to share with you these stories to show to you that it's not just that. Stalkers will go after your job, they'll go after your reputation, they'll go after your families and friends, and they'll do everything they can to destroy the life that you've built up. Stalking is a crime of fear. And whenever you're being stalked, you don't know how far your stalker is going to go because you know that their behaviour and their obsession is abnormal. And if there's been a death threat, it's a very terrifying and isolating existence because nobody understands except those who've gone through this. And this is what the law agencies that are in place to protect us need to understand, the impact that this has not only on us victims, because I am a victim too, but also on our children, on our families, and those that are around us trying to support us. Victims and people in Northern Ireland think that we don't have stalking laws, so stalkers cannot be prosecuted. But I wish to inform everybody, but that's not the case. We have SP1 2012, which is policies and procedures that could be used to prosecute stalking in Northern Ireland, but it's not being used.
It's been going on now for some 9 months. I barricade the doors, I chain the doors together, I put down planks of wood to stop the door from being pushed in. I live in a constant fear that my stalker and abuser will return, because the stress and strains of all of this in actual fact caused me to have a heart attack. I initially, at the very start, had to report almost daily different things that had happened, and other things that came to mind, but I found it very difficult as a male, having to put myself forward as a victim of assault and abuse, because as a male I found it very, very difficult. Initially I felt that I was being taken seriously, but very, very quickly I began to realise that there was no seriousness to this on behalf of the PSNI. It was only after I spoke to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Helpline that I got the courage to speak out. I have always been of the mind that to try and keep the family together, and I overlooked the seriousness of the assaults. I went to see a solicitor because I felt that I needed to not just to protect myself, but to protect property, not realising further down the track that I would be subject to stalking, which has happened through family members, which is very disturbing, to say the least. And on one occasion I came home to find out that the family computer, which I had a certain amount of evidence on my behalf, wrecked. It was totally, it had been formatted. I had items moved, removed, things that I knew were in cupboards that I would know where to go immediately and find, and they were missing. There was things seemed to have just disappeared into thin air, stuff that I bought at the shops, for instance, and I started to think, am I losing my faculty? Am I starting to become insane, if you like? Because I hadn't realised they'd been in, I had absolutely no idea what was going on. I started to really doubt my own sanity at this stage. I was always very confident, very articulate, but now with this I am very guarded. I have withdrawn from multiple groups that I was quite happy to be with, and basically the whole mental side of things, personal mental health, has deteriorated to the state now that I'm actually on medication just even to try to sleep at night. I had a serious health issue related to stress, which caused me to, in actual fact, die. I had to be resuscitated. I have made the various statements to the police, and I have had no response. I've had no messages from the police to say how my complaint is progressing. The only time that they seem to be of any interest to the whole thing is the counter-allegations. And the counter-allegations are absolutely false and without evidence. It's just been extremely, extremely difficult, and my life is turned on its head. I'm trying to get access to my children. Access has been withdrawn under these false allegations to social services. If I was able to turn the clock back, I would never have set eyes on my abuser, even though we've been in a long-term relationship of over 20 years. Which is crazy to think that someone of my years could be caught up into this web because I wouldn't bow down to financial abuse. I rang the Domestic and Sexual Violence Helpline, but when I explained to them what actually had happened, they asked me questions. Had this procedure been followed or another procedure followed? And I had never heard of these. There was forms called a DASH form and Marek, which I hadn't heard anything about. I knew nothing about them. On a second occasion, when I had to bring the police to my family home, I felt the second set of officers to be very offish and not interested. And I questioned them and I said, is there not a need for a DASH form to be filled in? Because I had got this information from the Domestic and Sexual Violence Helpline. Looked to be disturbed by their colleagues' inability to take on board what I was trying to say. But later the following day, the other officer rang and did the DASH form over the telephone, but they didn't complete. They had to leave because there was an urgent call, so they really didn't complete the DASH form at that stage. I felt so much aggrieved by the lack in procedure, and again, after speaking to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Helpline, I was advised that I should very probably need to speak to the police ombudsman, who came to my home and seemed to be very supportive, but he in actual fact didn't know what the procedure was either. He didn't know about DASH, he didn't know about the other form. I feel very, very let down by the PSNI. I do not feel safe in my own home. I don't feel safe when I'm outside of my own home. I feel very, very let down by the Ombudsman, who made a conclusion that the police in actual fact had done exactly what they needed to do, even though they hadn't followed procedure, and even though when he interviewed me, he didn't know what the procedure was. Unfortunately, I have no faith whatsoever in the Police Service of Northern Ireland. I have absolutely no faith in the Ombudsman. I think they're only there to gloss over, and there's no justice for the victims. They don't seem to know the procedures in domestic violence and stalking. They don't seem to get a grip of what needs to be done. I believe stalking is not being taken seriously. It's not seen as a crime. They don't realise not just the impact that it has on the victim, but on the victim's mental health. You feel and begin to feel that there's eyes watching you everywhere. You don't trust anyone. Innocent things that would happen, like even a car pull up across the front of my house, I'm worrying in case it may be the stalkers. If I had to do this all over again, the very last thing I would ever have done was to involve the PSNI, because it just made my situation even more dangerous. The counter allegations, which are false, from my partner have been taken very seriously. In actual fact, my treatment by both the PSNI, the Ombudsman, I would say that there's going to be no resolution for me. I have no hope for the future, none. It feels like you're the only one in the world. You feel like it's you against the world. You feel like that you've nowhere to turn and no one to turn to. And it is a very lonely place at times. And it's had a severe impact on my mental health, and I've been in some very dark places with this.
My stalking has been going on now for 2.5 years, nearly 3 years, following about gestures, gifts, apologies. So first of all, you think it's just somebody trying to make amends and be nice. And when it continues, then you realise that it's not normal behaviour. I had told him in no uncertain terms to stay away from me, not to follow me. I didn't want anything to do with him. I had blocked him through all means of contact, email, Facebook, all social media, everything that I could do, I blocked him, and he still continued to turn up. He then started writing me letters, delivering stuff to the house, which I obviously had no control over, although when he did arrive at the house I told him to go away and not to come to the house, but then I realised that he wouldn't listen. I then contacted the PSNI, and they said they would have a chat with him, which they'd done. They went out and had a chat with him. He then sent me a letter to say how worried he was. He thought something, when the police had arrived at his door, he thought something had happened to me. He didn't take it under his belt that it was his actual behaviour. So I knew then something seriously was wrong. Well, he did threaten me via text message to say, it didn't really make sense, the text message, but it did say the word shotgun in it. None of that deemed to be significant enough in court. The first time he got arrested, that really lifted his campaign. So basically he would have been following me if I went out for a walk most nights. So I couldn't go out for a walk. I couldn't do my sporting activities that I wanted to do. He followed me there. He even followed me to the other end of the country by finding out from a man to see where I was going, what hotel I was staying in. So that evening that I was sitting in the hotel, I turned round, and this was in Donegal. He walked in, and I couldn't believe it. When I contacted the man who was head of the organisation, he said he was sorry. He had forwarded me on the email that my stalker had sent me to say that he was a close friend of mine and wanted to surprise me. But that just showed me then the lies and manipulation that he was using against everybody to find out my whereabouts. So basically that meant a night of no sleep, and I couldn't continue on with what I was doing. I got up at 5 o'clock the next morning and left the hotel before he knew what I was doing. I got to the point I didn't want to go out of the house, because wherever I went there was always going to be some sort of confrontation. So I didn't want that, but also I didn't want to go into work. You're always constantly watching your back. you're looking out the curtains. There's no such thing as a good night's sleep. Any car drives past, you're up, you're out looking. You're just constantly on edge. I probably went to the PSNI maybe 20 or 30 times. The problem seemed to lie with whether there was what direct and indirect contact meant. And a lot of the PSNI officers, you could tell, couldn't really be bothered with it. So for example, if I had turned up and he had turned up, I would have to leave and go home. And I was the one that had to step down because I had to phone the police. And then usually had to wait up to an hour or so before the police came. They then phoned their sergeant, and the sergeant usually said, no, that's not direct contact. But if somebody turns up and is standing face to face staring you out, that's direct contact. But the majority of the situations by the police weren't handled well. I was never put in contact with the domestic violence officer in the station. Sometimes it was 2 weeks before somebody even got back to me. Maybe another 5 cases had went on. It got to a point where I didn't want to phone anymore because nothing was being done. That was stripping me of my life and allowing my stalker to continue on doing what he done best. And then he turned the harassment on me. Once he was arrested, he then said that I had been harassing him. So he went to the police station with a file full of made up evidence, which they then came and asked me to go in and be cautioned for. When I arrived at the police station to be cautioned, the girl that cautioned me didn't know what I was being cautioned for. Neither did I. Nobody told me. I was told just to accept the caution and they would let me know later on to give me a ring because the constable dealing with the case was out at the time. So I had to go to the police station, be cautioned, and I didn't know why I was being cautioned, neither did the PSNI officer, that I had been cautioned for allegedly harassing him. And that included incidents like going to my work. He had said that me going to my work had caused him to be unsettled because he wanted to go there. So I was cautioned for going to work by the PSNI. My stalker had used his ex-partner to then file complaints against me until I received this court order, which said basically that the person feared from their life from me. With the ex-partner's case, that would have been maybe 6 times, 5 or 6 times, because it kept getting adjourned. The judge had been looking for a letter of undertaking for both of us to stay away from each other. I found this quite strange in the first instance because I didn't know the person, so I wouldn't be near them anyway. But a barrister had said, look, just do what the judge requires, but the ex-partner wouldn't then agree to that. Then I had to remind my barrister that the ex-partner had said that they would drop the charges against me if I dropped the charges against their partner. And I had asked my barrister, was that not perjury? Is that not against the law? Once I mentioned that to my barrister, the ex-partner then, he went and spoke to their barrister, and the ex-partner then, straight away it was dropped in 5 minutes. My barrister came back to me and said, that's it, it's finished. And on that day by a judge, I was denied my human rights. That was so unfair, and also trailed me through the courts for 18 months for nothing. For the stalking case, I could have been in court maybe 10 times. The judge really wasn't interested, and said that all funds would have to be paid because it was my choice to defend myself. So I had to defend myself against allegations that weren't true, that were clearly made up by a person that I didn't know, which I thought in the legal system was absolutely ridiculous. Why did it go on for 18 months? Why was that outcome not then broached straight away? So I spent 18 months of my life waiting for the same outcome that I could have had straight away. I would say the PSNI really need to look at training of the staff, because there seems to be, in my case, a real lack of knowledge between what direct and indirect contact means, and in the justice system. For the barrister from the PPS to tell me that the bound over would be better, I had enough evidence for the harassment charge to go ahead. It was very clear to everybody. You know, if I went with the harassment, it might then encourage him to behave worse or to, you know, up his ante again. Well, this started 3 weeks after he came out of court. So obviously been bound over, didn't faze him. So I really don't think it was the place of the barrister to give that advice. I think, you know, if you're a barrister and you're there to protect victims and the evidence is there, why do you not want to prosecute people then? Nobody understands. It's the same thing over and over again. You nearly become repetitive like the stalker. You don't have a life. Basically, your life just stops.
Why are letters of undertaking offered between the barristers to sort out the problem? Why are they not being heard by the judges? And why are prosecutions not taking place? Letters of undertaking are used in harassment cases in the courts. They are offered to parties to stay away from each other or to stay away from a person. This then avoids having to have harassment cases heard in the courts, but it also saves prosecutions of harassment. And the question is, why? This practice has to stop because what it's doing is it's re-victimising the person that is actually in need of the protection of the law. Another question, why is legal aid being used, which is taxpayers' money, to defend cases in court whenever perpetrators of stalking or abusive exes are deliberately abusing the law and using the loopholes to further victimise and distress the person that they are targeting? There are countless endless court appearances, and often these cases are based on meritless, which means no evidence cases. This needs to stop. Why is there no ombudsman for law in Northern Ireland? There's one in the UK. How come we don't have one? We have nowhere to complain about third-party solicitors here in Northern Ireland. Does that mean that the solicitors are above the law and that they're not open to fraud just like every other profession? I have heard from a solicitors regulatory body that solicitors do not need evidence to take cases. Perpetrators are being given a very powerful weapon, which is a loopholed legal system, which allows lies and counter-allegations and false allegations to be made to the courts and to the PSNI. Because perjury is not being prosecuted, this confirms this. Stalking NI cannot understand why the amount of people that are contacting the agency and that are talking about being stalked are being denied their human rights. Why is the justice system and agencies in place to protect us not recognising that this is a mental health crime and is causing so much distress to not only the families and the people that are being targeted by stalkers, but also to the children? The longer this goes on, the more damage it causes. This needs to be stopped at the very beginning.